Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to give you some book recommendations based off of some movies and TV shows that you might have watched. So it's like, if you watch this movie or this TV show and you really enjoyed it, then you might enjoy the book that I'm pairing it up with, and I'll explain to you why. So I actually decided to make this video because I recently read this book, On the Rocks by Candy Steiner. So this is the first book in the Becker Brothers series, and the entire time I was reading this book, I just had a couple of things running through my head, making me like get all the feelings from when I watched and listened to these things. So Sweet Home Alabama, the last song, Speak Now, and then Love Story by Taylor Swift, like those two songs and then those two movies. Jumble all those four things together and I feel like you just got all of the feelings of this book. So if you're not familiar with this story, you're basically following this girl who is 19 years old and she's the mayor's daughter and she's about to marry a politician. Like she was born and bred her entire life to basically like be a politician's wife, and she's now about to do that. She's just coming home. She lives in this like small southern Tennessee town and she's like very wealthy, very like high standing citizen in this small town sort of thing. And basically she's just coming home to prepare for her wedding. And when she's there, she basically runs into this guy who has always been known for like, to be a lot of trouble. Like he's one of the Becker brothers and they're always known to be like, the troublemakers of the town. And basically they just get into a conversation and he starts to make her question things about like what she's about to commit to and like where her life is going and everything like that. And she basically is like starting to think like, oh, maybe I don't actually want to get married. Like maybe I don't want this life that I've always thought was just like set out for me and everything like that. And it's basically just going to end up being their romance. So it is a small town forbidden age gap romance, and it had such amazing vibes, and I really did thoroughly enjoy this book. But basically the entire time I was reading it, I kept thinking of these four things. So basically it's like Sweet Home Alabama, very easy to connect those dots because it's like this girl is like, set to be married to like this very, high standing citizen, which equals out to the politician. She comes back to her small town and she basically falls in love with somebody from her past. So I just kept feeling like those vibes, very like small town southern vibes. Like those were the vibes I was getting off of this book that made me think of this movie. And then the last song, I kind of connected to this because I basically just kept thinking of like the whole idea of like, you're from this nice southern family and you end up falling in love with somebody who doesn't necessarily fit into your lifestyle. And that was definitely what happened in this book. And that's definitely what happened in the last song, except like swap out the male for the female sort of thing. And then I also like just connected like Speak Now and Love Story because just I feel like they were playing on in my head in the background the entire time I was reading this book. Well, first of all, Speak Now is a song that is basically about this girl who wants to crash her former love's wedding. She's like, oh, you're marrying the wrong guy and I'm gonna come and crash your wedding sort of thing. Like that's the gist of that sort of song, and it definitely gave off these vibes, and I feel like it fit so well to it. And then Love Story, it is a little bit of like a Romeo and Juliet sort of situation, but I really do think that it still gave off these vibes because there were a couple of scenes that just made me think of that book. Like the whole idea of like, oh, well, my father originally, like, I don't think that he would accept you, but then by the end of it, he does accept you. And like, all of those sort of things. I don't really want to go like too into it because I don't want to give any like, spoilers away, but basically just if you enjoyed one of these four things, I really do think that you might really enjoy the feelings that this book gave off. So definitely check out this book because I really did enjoy it. But either way, besides that, I did have one more book recommendation that I wanted to share for the last song specifically, and that was The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. So in the last song, you're basically following this girl who is not very close to her father, but she basically is going to go and spend the summer with him. And then when she's there, she's obviously going to fall in love, and it's going to be like a very unlikely pairing sort of situation. And basically like, things are going to happen with her father, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it's such an old movie. I could totally give away spoilers, but basically the father is obviously, not very, healthy, and stuff is going to go down along those lines. And basically this book is extremely similar. This girl, she never really knew her father. She's basically estranged from him. And one day she gets a call basically saying like, look, your father isn't doing so well. And if you want to get to know him before he unfortunately passes away, then maybe you should come and visit him. So that's exactly what she does. She goes to this small town in the middle of Alaska where her father lives, and she basically gets to go and spend some time with him and get to know him. And when she's there, she's going to bump into one of her father's workers that happens to also live next door to him, and she's basically going to have an enemies to lovers sort of like romance thing going on with him. And basically it's just going to be like, that sort of storyline. And I just think that like, though this movie and then this book really do give off a lot of similar vibes for many reasons. It's like small town setting, even though it's a very different sort of small small town setting. Like the last song is a beach, like South Carolina sort of setting, and then this is like middle of nowhere, Alaska, but still small town. And then the whole thing of like getting to know your father, a little bit more of that serious situation. And then also you're having a romance with a very unlikely pairing. Like, you know, the two people in the last song, like he's very wealthy, she is not that sort of vibe, and basically they're gonna fall in love anyway. And in this situation, they very much don't get along. She's like a city girl, he is like a small town boy, and they really like, you know, they banter and they like, you know, very much clash, but somehow they're gonna fall in love anyway. So basically, if you liked this movie, I definitely recommend checking out this book because I do think that you will probably enjoy it. But anyway, after this, I wanted to share with you this book called Funny Feelings by Tara Dewitt. So full warning now, I didn't personally enjoy this book, but I do know that I'm very much in the minority of this. I know that this book is like going around a lot and a lot of people are saying really amazing things about it. And even though I didn't enjoy a book, it doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy a book. And I happen to have had a really good pairing for this, so I wanted to mention it anyway, because if you enjoyed Mrs. Maisels, which is a TV show on Amazon Prime, then I really think that you might enjoy the vibes of this book. So in this story, you're basically following this girl comedian who just got offered to go on tour with this like very famous comedic like female group, and they basically ask her to fake date her manager to just like stir up some media attention and things like that. And basically they're gonna obviously end up falling in love even though they're like starting out as fake dating. And the whole thing about it is that it's a dual timeline and you get to follow them throughout the years as they kind of like grew from being like, you know, they just met randomly and then he's gonna become her manager and then they're kind of gonna become friends. And the thing is that they've both secretly been pining for each other this entire time, but they didn't really know that the other had feelings for them because they have a really big age gap. And like he just thought that like, you know, she's way too young for him, and she thought that like he's just not interested. So you get to see them throughout the years, and also like, you know, in the present day as they're fake dating, and then like, you know, their feelings are starting to really come out because they're pretending to be in love with each other. And then also you get to see them as they're actually falling in love with each other. So it is a very cute story. It just like, for some reason I didn't really connect to it, but I happen to think that if you liked Mrs. Maisels, then you'd really like this book, because Mrs. Maisels is basically exactly that. You're following this female comedian, which is like, you know, it's not a very big thing in the industry for like, you know, a female to be a comedian. It's a mainly male industry, and you really get that feeling off of both of these movies and like this TV show and this book, that like, you know, they're just kind of in the minority, but they're really, really funny, and they really very much stand out in their like, you know, comedic section or whatever you want to call it. But either way, what's interesting is that in the Mrs. Maisels books, not only is she a female comedian, did I just say books? Not only in the Mrs. Maisels TV show is she a comedian, but at one point she's also going to go on tour with this very famous band, and then, you know, things are going to happen. Like, it doesn't necessarily have the same romance aspect because there's other things going on in her life, like because she's like recently getting divorced and everything like that. But basically, female comedian, two people basically about to go on tour with very famous people, and just overall the funny-ish sort of a vibes. I definitely think that if you like Mrs. Maisels, you really might enjoy Funny Feelings. So definitely give it a shot, and don't take my like negative review of it of like, oh, it didn't work for me, because still, if something didn't work for me, it really, really might still work for you. So yeah, I just think that this was a really good pairing and I wanted to share it with you. But either way, after that, I also wanted to share with you this book called By Your Side by Casey West. So this is a YA romance, and I don't usually talk about YA romances very often on my channel anymore, but happens to be when I read this, I don't know how long ago, maybe a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago by now. But either way, when I read it, I just kept thinking that it gave off such breakfast feeling vibes. In this story, you're following this girl who's like the really popular girl, and at the beginning of the story, she's basically like in the library with her friends, and they basically like went outside to like, you know, I don't know, go do something, and she had to stay behind for a second, and she ends up getting locked in the library for a very long weekend. I think it was like Martin Luther King Jr. Day or like Memorial Day or something like that. But either way, she got locked in the library and she thought she was all alone, but then she soon finds out that somebody else is actually in the library with her, and that is like kind of like the bad boy of her school. Like, he's kind of like the outcast. She doesn't really ever talk to him because like she's a popular girl and he's the very unpopular boy, and basically they're gonna end up spending the weekend together in the library, and then obviously it's going to be like their very unlikely romance situation. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, so I'm not going to say anything more than that. But I just think that this book gave off such Breakfast Club vibes, because like, first of all, like spending like, you know, some time in the library, even though that was a tension and this was them getting stuck in there for the weekend, it's still library setting. And then also a couple of different type of people all being like mushed together for a very unlikely situation. Like, you know, in the Breakfast Club, you have like the popular kid, and then you have the unpopular kid, and then you have like the jock and everything like that. And I just think that like, if you enjoy The Breakfast Club, this book might really work for you. So just take my word for it. I don't know if I explained that really well, but I really do think that it is a good matchup. But either way, after this, I also wanted to share with you the Dirty Air series by Lauren Asher, and I wanted to match it up with Herbie Fully Loaded. So as a child, I would watch Herbie Fully Loaded all the freaking time. I'm pretty sure I had it on like VHS and like DVD, and anytime it would come on TV, I don't know if it was like ABC Family or like Disney Channel or anything like that, but anytime I saw it on TV, I would watch it because I really, really loved this movie. And I happen to think that the reason why I loved it was because of like the race car aspect. Like obviously that's what like the whole like actual like movie is about. But either way, as an adult, I read the Dirty Air series, and it just really reminded me of Herbie Fully Loaded because of the race car aspect of it. In all of these books, you're basically following different Formula One race car drivers as they each get their own romance. So it definitely has the same type of setting. And I think that if when you were a kid, you really liked Herbie Fully Loaded, then you should definitely check out the Dirty Air series because it just has the same vibes. And I happen to think that like we don't really see a lot of race car driving sort of like, you know, things out there. Like I think that this is the only series that I've ever read with the race car, you know, setting. And I don't really know a lot of movies that take place with like race car aspects in it. So basically, if you liked this movie, I definitely think that you should check out this book because it definitely has similar vibes, even though they're obviously like very different. But still, I think that they are similar. But either way, with that said, we can move on from that. I wanted to also share with you this book called Corrupt by Penelope Douglas. So this is the first book in the Devil's Night companion series, and I wanted to match it up with the Riverdale TV show. And that is mainly for like the aesthetic and the vibes that both of these things give off. In this book, you're basically following this girl who a couple of years ago hung out with this group of guys on the night before Halloween. I think it was like Halloween Eve, whatever Devil's Night is called. I don't really remember what it is, but like right at Halloween, there's this night called Devil's Night, and they basically hung out and they did a couple of illegal stuff, and then they basically all blame her because like right after that, they all ended up like getting sent to jail because like somehow like what they did ended up getting out, and they all blame her thinking that she's the one who did it. So now it's a couple of years later and they're out of jail and they're basically out to get revenge on her for sending them to jail, and that is basically what the storyline is going to be. So it's like very like bully romance, very dark, very twisted, very taboo, and very revenge plotty. And I just happen to think that it has this sort of like atmospheric setting where it's very dark, very like intense, ultra dramatic, everything like that. And I happen to think that the Riverdale setting is very much like that as well. Like there's obviously different things going on in the Riverdale series overall, but the feeling of the series I feel very much fits in with the Devil's Night series. So I do think that if you were a fan of the Riverdale TV show, then you might really enjoy this book. But just keep in mind that this series is not for everybody. It is very dark and twisted, and it might make some people uncomfortable. So definitely check it out and see if it's for you. It might not be, but if it is, then I do think that you will really, really enjoy it. So yeah, Corrupt and the Devil's Night series overall by Penelope Douglas. But either way, after this, I also wanted to share with you this book called Hooked by Emily McIntyre. This is a dark and twisted Peter Pan retelling, so obviously I'm going to match it up with Peter Pan. So if you were a fan of Peter Pan as a child and now as an adult you are into, you know, dark and twisted romance books, then I really do think that you might enjoy this book because this had such a good retelling vibe to it. In this book, you're basically following this guy named Hook who, when he was a kid, his parents used to work with this guy named Peter Pan, and somehow Peter Pan murdered his parents, and now he's out to get revenge on Peter. And one way he's going to do that is by getting close to his daughter, who is named Wendy, who is kind of like his little shadow. Like she's always known to like always be following her father around, and basically he's going to end up seducing his daughter to basically get revenge on Peter for murdering his parents when he was younger. So that is more or less the gist of the story. There's a lot more going on that makes it very dark, very like mafia vibes, even though it's not mafia. They're just dealing with like drugs, which is pixie dust and things along those lines. You even have like Tinkerbell, who is Peter Pan's assistant, and it basically is just a really, really good Peter Pan retelling with a dark and twisted take on it. Peter Pan was one of my favorite Disney movies as a kid, and I think that's why I really appreciated this book, because I loved seeing all the elements she took from the movies and mixed it up to make a dark and twisted romance of it. So basically, if you liked Peter Pan as a kid and you're into dark romances, I definitely recommend checking this book out. But either way, after this, I also wanted to share with you the Mindfuck series by St. Abbey, and I wanted to pair it up with Criminal Minds and then also Dexter, which are two TV shows. And that is basically because this is literally like those shows jumbled together and put it into a book plus add on a little bit of a romance. Because in this story, you're following this girl who is a serial killer, and she's going to end up falling in love with the FBI agent who is currently tracking her down because, like, you know, she's leaving a string of murder sort of situation. So he obviously has no clue who she is, and she does know who he is, but she's going to fall in love with him anyway. And it is just like the general like plot line. That's like the general plot line of the story, and I don't really want to give too much away because there are a lot of like twists and turns that happen throughout the story. And I definitely recommend checking up some trigger warnings for this book because it is very dark, very twisted, and very intense, but it is just such a freaking good time. It's so captivating. And I just think that if you're a fan of these two TV shows, this would be the perfect book for you to check out. So Mindfuck series by S.T. Abbey. But either way, that was actually the last romance book that I wanted to share with you. Before I do let you go though, I did have two other books that I wanted to share that I have good matchups for, but they are fantasy books. And I know I don't really like talk about fantasy on my channel anymore very often, so I just wanted to say that before I get started with them. But either way, with that said, I did want to share Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. So I read this book a very long time ago, very much when I was in like my fantasy era. And either way, when I read this, I really remember thinking of Atlantis. Like, you know, the children's movie Atlantis where like they go and they find Atlantis. This is basically like a book version of it. In this story, you're basically following this guy who he is like kind of, I think he works in the library. He's like lived there his entire life. And either way, he's always believed of this place. I don't really remember what it's called, but I think that's the point of the story. I haven't read this in a while, but I'm pretty sure in this book, there's this place that doesn't actually have a name because it was erased from like, you know, everybody's like memory or something like that. But he believes that this place exists, even though like it's very like fictional in their world. Nobody actually believes that like this place is like a real thing because nobody's heard from them in a very long time. And either way, at the beginning of the story, people from this place basically like comes to him and they're asking for help or something like that. And then he's going to end up going to this place, which is like almost non-existent, that like nobody thought was a real place. And that is kind of why I thought it was Atlantis. I explained that so freaking horribly, but please like forgive me because I haven't read this book in a very long time. And also I haven't like watched the movie since I was a kid. But either way, I just really remember thinking that when I was reading this book, it gave off such Atlantis vibes for so many reasons. Like very much the aesthetic of the book, the idea of the book with like Atlantis not being a real place, and then also this place not being a real place, and just everything about it. I really think that it gave off very similar feelings. And I don't want to get into it because I don't want to give away any spoilers for this book, but just take my word for it that if as a child you were a fan of Atlantis and now you are into fantasy books and you have not yet read this book, then you should definitely check it out. It is a duet though. You do have to read the second book to get like, you know, the final conclusion of the story. I think it's called like Muse of Nightmares or something like that. But either way, really good fantasy duet. Definitely recommend checking it out, even though I like explained that completely horribly. But after this, I did want to share with you one more book, and that is the Fallen Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes. So this is the first book in I think like a 6-book series, and either way, the entire time I was reading this book, I very much thought that it felt like Game of Thrones. So if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, definitely recommend checking out this series. This is a YA fantasy series, and why I wanted to pair them up is because I just feel like it had the same feelings of the way that like in Game of Thrones, you're following so many different perspectives of things that are happening on so many different parts of like, you know, the continent or whatever it is that you want to call it. This book had the same feelings. You're following so many perspectives. Like literally, like in book 1, you're following 3 different perspectives, and then in each book you get to follow more and more people. I think by the end you were following like 4 or 5 different people, and not only are you following different perspectives, but you're also following these people who are not in the same place at the same time. So it's like you're getting to see so much of this world. You're getting to see so much different things that are happening. There's also like wars going on and magic and weird like, you know, dark elements and things along those lines, and things are going to be like, you know, revealed and like figured out and things along like everything like that, you know, very Game of Thrones feelings. I just think that if you really liked the whole aspect of the wars in Game of Thrones, all of the different settings where it's like you're getting such different vibes from each different person's perspective, basically everything about Game of Thrones, this book just screams it. It's like a YA book version of it. So I definitely recommend checking this series out if you were a fan of the Game of Thrones TV show. But either way, with that said, that is the conclusion of today's video. So I hope that you found this video entertaining. It was kind of just supposed to be like a little bit of a fun experiment for me, but I had a really fun time making it. So if you enjoyed watching it, then please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also, let me know down in the comment section below if you wanted me to make a part 2 of this, because I had a really great time making this and I would love to do it again for you guys in the future. But either way, with that said, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you're not currently subscribed. And again, give this video a like if you have not done that yet. But either way, that is all. So thank you again for watching. I very much appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.